PSG are Super Cup champions, but in the most dramatic sense possible. The way this game went was absolutely ridiculous. Commiserations to Spurs, who I actually think played a pretty good game over the 90 minutes. Thomas Frank taking charge of his first official game at the club. And guys, Spurs really look like a problem at times. 2-0 up after 50 minutes. We were thinking to ourselves, this is the Thomas Frank Spurs revolution. Playing a 5 at the back. Kudus looking incredible. And then all of a sudden, PSG second half slowly started getting back into the game, made some substitutions, hit them with a late goal in the 85th minute, and then with virtually the last kick of the game, Dembele finding Goncalo Ramos perfectly. But this was a game of two halves, honestly, and I think the best way to kind of depict my thoughts is actually introducing something new to the channel. Ladies and gentlemen, take a look. I am very, very fortunate to have been given by my good friend James Alcott a tactics board, the JLA tactics board. This is what he uses on all his videos. If you guys know James Alcott on YouTube, in my opinion, the best football content creator there is. But this is really his pièce de résistance, right? This is his bread and butter. This is what we used on the press as well too when we were filming with The Zone this summer. And he's released it to the public. You can go and buy it. You can go and subscribe to it. And this is it, man. I mean, I told you guys I want to introduce some more tactics-based content, and I think this is the perfect place to start. Now, I'm still getting up to scratch with the software, so this might not be as in-depth as I kind of want it to be, but it's going to get better every single week this season. So first and foremost, check it out. I'm going to leave the link in the description down below, and shout out to James for releasing this to the public, because this is a sick tool for content creators, coaches, analysts, or people anyway in general. If you love the game, this is for you. But let's get into it, because PSG, right? We know them based off last season for playing probably the most predictable starting 11 in Europe. We all know when everyone's fit, this is how PSG start, right? So this was a team that won the Champions League last season. Donnarumma on goal, Hakimi, Marquinhos, Pacho, Mendes, Ruiz, Vitinha, Neves, Kvara, Dembele, Doué. They play this team game in, game out. This is the team that made history in the Champions League. And what makes this team so special for me is that there's so much interchanging going on over 90 minutes. I can't remember many teams in my lifetime that I've seen move so fluidly in and out of possession and in and out of positions like this PSG team does. So for example, Dembele will move here, Doué will come in here, Hakimi will pop up here, Hakimi will pop up here, Hakimi will pop up here, he pops up everywhere, Mendes can pop up here, here. We often see Vitinha drop deep, almost form a 3 at times. He'll come here, these guys will form a triangle, and Dembele has they are just a fluid monster, and it's what makes them so difficult, right? Because the opposition, on the other hand, are constantly having to adjust. If Kvara moves here, Ruiz will make that overlap, Mendes will kind of have space here. All of a sudden, you're left at 6s and 7s. PSG have picked teams apart over the last 12 months playing this way. But today, PSG switched it up completely. And I don't think for the better. PSG today decided to play like this. Mendes, Pacho, Marquinhos, Hakimi, of course. But in midfield, Zaire Emery introduced into the team. And Desiree Doué, who we typically see out here, occupying a berth in midfield. Barcola taking a space on the left. Dembele, of course, up front, and Kvara moving out on the right. And on paper, I think we originally thought it could look like this, which is something the last time we probably saw PSG play like this was 2 years ago against Newcastle in the group stage, where they got absolutely destroyed at St. James's Park. Killed. We haven't seen it since. And we thought maybe we could see it reintroduced today. But no, Enrique went with this, which on paper, right, you would think, okay, it should be a similar setup. But actually, I think it completely let them down here. Because while Dembele is always going to be this guy who's going here, 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 he goes wherever he wants, right? Kvara and Barcola really played today as like touchline wingers. Barcola is hugging this touchline. He's not really the kind of winger that you're going to see pop up here, or pop up here, or pop up here. He's your old-fashioned winger. Whereas Kvara can typically do that on that side, but today you really again saw him hugging the right. And now because these guys, I think, aren't making these runs in here, that means that it is a bit more static. So if he's not moving in here, Zaire Emery is probably not moving here. Mendes isn't moving here. I think you saw Mendes for the first time in a while in a PSG shirt really play as an out-and-out left back. On the other side, I think it was similar. Again, we're used to seeing Hakimi pop up here, and he did that a little bit, but I just think Hakimi is much more of a threat over 90 minutes typically. And I think because these guys were so wide and stayed so wide, it really limited what the fullbacks were able to do and where they were able to go. And then we go to the midfield, right? Where again, Vitinha will pop up in spaces here and build up. He really popped up everywhere here, not so much here. And Zaire Emery and Doué, I think, massively struggled to kind of mimic what you usually get from Neves and Ruiz, who are so brilliant, understand their roles to a T. I really think you struggled to see it from these two. And then on the other hand, we had Spurs playing for the first time, like I said, under Thomas Frank in an official game, and he decided to deploy a back three. Van de Ven, Romero, Danso, really strong, athletic back three. I think they're all quick. They're all very, very good. They're very aggressive. I'm a big fan of these three. Spence and Porro on the right or on the left, playing as wing backs. Sarr, Bentancur, and Painho, which again is just physicality, duels, athleticism, aggressiveness in there. And then Richarlison and Kudus, who were given the job of effectively leading the line for Spurs. And if you can trace your memory back to what I just showed you a few seconds ago, PSG were playing really wide with their wingers and fullbacks, right? I think that was easy food for Spence and Porro to deal with. Because if Kvara is drifting into these spaces, that makes it a bit more difficult because then Porro has to track, Painho has to go here. But if it's really a case of Kvara is really just kind of playing as a regular touchline winger, Porro has a much more straightforward job to do. And because the wingers were kind of occupied by Porro and Spence, and because the fullbacks maybe weren't as effective as they usually are, I felt that it really became a straight-up midfield battle between Bentancur, Sarr, and Painho, and Doué, Zaire Emery, and Vitinha. And I almost feel like these three right here told the other three, try and break us down. Try and out-midfield us. And I think Doué and Zaire Emery really had little to no impact on the game. Because every single time they really tried to occupy these spaces up here, Bentancur is locking him up, Painho is locking him up, and Sarr, I thought, had a tremendous game, man. The guy occupies so much ground. But the real difficulty for Spurs would ultimately come in what these guys up front were able to do in Kudus and Richarlison. And I think they each did a tremendous job of holding up the play. I think they gave you a real masterclass in terms of hold-up play. But that was the setup. I think from PSG, they drifted way too far away from what made them great last season, alongside the fact that it's the first game of the year. They haven't played since the Club World Cup final, and they've been training for a week. Whereas Spurs, I think, really showed that this is a potential tool in their arsenal for them. This back three here, right? I'm not sure he's going to play it all the time, especially if he goes on and signs Eze, who might play in this area right here, or Savinho, who's obviously going to want to be a touchline winger on the right. If that's the case, I think Spurs play a back four. But the fact that Thomas Frank has this in his locker, and of course we saw it when he was at Brentford, he's capable of playing a back three, he's capable of coaching a back four. I think the fact that he can deploy that just makes Spurs an even more dangerous outfit. And I think for the first 60, 70 minutes, Spurs were really, really difficult to break down, and they were really, really effective playing it up to those two. But ultimately, Spurs found massive success in one way more than most. And honestly, if you paid attention to these managers' press conferences, interviews before the week, you would have known how important set pieces were going to be. Thomas Frank's Brentford were known as a tremendous team of set pieces over the last few seasons. Every single time Brentford have throw-ins or corners or free kicks, you send the Arsenal up front, you send the Norgards up front, you send the chasing packs, the Ivan Tonys, and they are a problem. Putting the ball in the box, they more often than not attack it. And I think that was always going to be something that he was going to look to bring over to Spurs, and he even said it himself, right? And when you have Van de Ven, Romero, and Danso, you have Richarlison, you have Painho, you have Sarr, and you're looking at who PSG have in their back line. You look at PSG's team in general. It's a much smaller side than the one Spurs deploy. And on two occasions, Spurs found success off that. The first one was a long ball off a set piece. Painho, bit of the dark arts there, but trying to get a shot off. Chevalier deflects it off the crossbar right into the path of Van de Ven. Van de Ven scores. Now, you could ask yourself, should Chevalier have done a little better there? Would Donnarumma have even parried it? Would he have maybe just been a little taller and caught it? Maybe, but maybe we're nitpicking there. But for the second goal, I'm sorry, there's no nitpicking that can be done. Chevalier has a howler there. He has a massive howler there. Again, another set piece across the box this time into the path of Cristian Romero, who nods it across goal. But ultimately, Chevalier gets two hands on it. And he actually helps guide it into the far corner. And there was a lot of talk going into this game about Chevalier and Donnarumma, right? Because Donnarumma was the best goalkeeper in the world last season. He had an amazing campaign in the Champions League in particular. And I don't think they win the Champions League last season without him. But there have been issues discussing contract negotiations. Eventually, talks broke down, and Donnarumma is going to leave the club. He even wrote a statement last night. In his place comes Lucas Chevalier, who was, in my opinion, the best goalkeeper in Ligue 1 last season. In fact, not even my opinion. Two players cracked the Ligue 1 team of the season that didn't play for PSG last year. One of them was Ryan Cherki. The other one was Lucas Chevalier. For good reason. In the league, this guy was exceptional for Lille, and he's been very good for Lille over the last few years. He was very linked to Man United and to Aston Villa, and ultimately it's PSG with their new method of shopping for the best French talents who have gone for him. This was not a night to remember, even though in the penalty shootout, he actually made up for it, right? He dived right almost every single time and made a huge save on Micky van de Ven that ultimately won the game for PSG. But that error will be remembered by a lot of people because ultimately not everybody watches Ligue 1. So this was probably the first time a lot of people were watching Chevalier. And when a big figure like Donnarumma leaves the club or is about to leave the club, all eyes now go on you. That's a moment he's going to want to forget, but I think he's done a very good job in saving that penalty because he's able to deflect a bit of the criticism because he's kind of covered it up with that amazing moment later on, right? But Spurs go up 2-0, and honestly, right, for 60 minutes, I think they were the far superior team. They defended in their block exceptionally well. They limited to PSG to literally 0 shots on target. I can't remember one time Vicario was forced into a save. And those two up front, Richarlison and Kudus, were putting in dog's work. Richarlison, you know what you're going to get from that guy, right? It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be elegant. But he's going to run his socks off. He's going to contest for every single ball. He's going to be a bit of a bastard up front. And he's just going to be a thorn in your side. But Kudus is the one I really want to talk about, right? Because this is a player that signed for Spurs this summer for 55 million. A lot of people maybe raise an eyebrow because his season at West Ham wasn't that great. But respectfully, and I really mean this respectfully, I'm of the opinion that if you don't rate Mohamed Kudus, I don't think you understand what you're watching. This guy's a ridiculous player. And I understand he didn't have his best season at West Ham. But every time I watch him, I think to myself, you have something about you. You do. He's incredibly quick. He's incredibly powerful. He's very, very good one-on-one. He's good with his back to goal. I don't see what's to dislike about Mohamed Kudus. Yes, he had a poor season. Everyone on West Ham did. But when I think of the better talents in the Premier League, Kudus would have always been one of the names I'd say outside of the traditional big six that could easily play for most of the big sides. He could play at Arsenal. He would play at United. He could play at Chelsea. He could play at Liverpool. He could probably crack into that City team as well too. I think Kudus is a ridiculous player, and I think he's going to be one of the better signings this year in the Premier League. I think he really suits Spurs, and I think a few teams probably missed the trick because the year before when he had a great season for West Ham, everyone wanted him. And I think because his stock dropped a little bit, Spurs were the most interested party. But I sometimes think, like, really, is that the way we judge footballers now? Look at what they can bring to a game. And when I look at Kudus, he showed it all tonight, man. He was so difficult for Nuno Mendes to stop. He really did well against Pacho and Marquinhos as well, too. Was direct, created chances, got a shot off as well, too. I was a big fan of Mohamed Kudus, and I think the best is yet to come. But I'm really happy to see he's kind of put last season behind him, and it's a new year for him, even like mentally as well, too, because this is a top player. Ultimately, though, I think PSG did a really good job of turning the game, and I think it came in the form of substitutions. Kang-in Lee was one of the guys that came on. Goncalo Ramos came on as well, too, to be a real focal point up front. There were a few others. Malulu, of course, too, came on in the Champions League final. Academy player from PSG. They brought in a few different profiles, right? And I think Kang-in Lee in particular really kind of added a spark to the game because all of a sudden he's a bit more dynamic. He's a bit more fluid. He's a bit more creative than a Warren Zaire-Emery. And I just think PSG, the minute they start becoming a more dynamic side, that's when they're at their most dangerous. PSG are very easy to defend against when it's all very static. But what makes them the best team in the world, or one of the best teams in the world, is how fluid off the ball they are. And I'm sorry, in that first half, they just weren't able to do that. Now, whether that's due to the fact that they're tired, they're just coming off preseason, a week of training, they haven't played a game for a month and a half, maybe that's the case as well too. But I think those substitutions really lit a fire under their belly. And I want to give a big shout out as well too to Dembele, because although I looked at Kvara today and I didn't think he was that great, and I think Barcola was very wasteful with his final ball, and I think Doué was very, very poor today, Dembele was the one PSG attacker in my eyes that still played to the level we know he does every single week. And Kang-in Lee scores the first goal. An incredible strike past Vicario. No chance that he can do anything about it. But the second goal is just brilliance from Dembele, right? Picks it up, drives past Jed Spence, I believe it was, and then smashes an incredible cross across the box, man. Seriously. It's one of those crosses, right, that if you hit it with enough whip and enough pace, as long as your attacker is able to read the flight of the ball, more often than not, you're going to trouble the defense. He hit it with so much ferocity that all Goncalo Ramos had to do was just kind of guide it past Vicario, 2-2 in the dying minutes of the game, and it went to penalties. And ultimately, we know how the penalty shootout went. Vitinha missed this penalty in shocking manner, and to be honest with you, right, his methodology of shooting is so weird for me. Like the little run-up that he does before, was it against Villa he missed one, and then he missed one again today? I don't want to see that anymore, man. That was a terrible penalty. And it looked like, okay, Spurs kind of conceded that lead, but they were back in it. And then Van de Ven missed as well too. And then Matthias Tel missed as well too. And Chevalier got his big moment, like we said. He got his time in the sun, and that will do him a lot of good. I'm a big fan of Lucas Chevalier. I met him as well, too, at the award show. Really nice guy, and I think he's a great goalkeeper as well, too. But ultimately, it's PSG who walk away from this game. They're the winners. I think there are some question marks about them because it's now 2 games in a row. I know there's like a month and a half separating them, but it's Chelsea the first go around, and now Spurs, where there have been vulnerabilities. I think Spurs really kind of exposed that threat in behind, or that ball over the midfield, right? It's very difficult to play through PSG because of their press, but I think they have a weakness if you can go over the top. Arsenal showed it at times in the semifinal. Chelsea definitely showed it in the final of the Club World Cup, and I think Spurs did as well too. That long ball from Romero to Richarlison or Danso to Kudus, avoiding the PSG midfield and just kind of making it a 2v2 game like Richarlison and Kudus did. I think that's a way of finding success against PSG. And by the way, I want to mention something with Spurs. If you notice today, the biggest change about Spurs under Thomas Frank so far is how compact these 3 are. Under Ange last season, you'll see, I mean, typically it's more like this, right? Let's just imagine the back 4, right? It's more like this. But they'll practically be playing this high at times. There's incredible amounts of space between both center backs. There's an ocean of space behind them. And just in general as well too, right? These 3 are never close enough to these guys. So with Spurs, I think the biggest thing under Ange last season that really hurt them was the amount of space they found themselves defending, because I don't think as a group they were compact enough. But we really saw it today with Spurs. These guys weren't afraid to defend in their own box. They weren't afraid to just defend on the edge of their box as well too, but they were all very, very compact. Spence and Porro, again, at times when they needed to be very compact, very close to each other. And I think these guys as well too never left too much space to defend in front of them for the likes of Romero, Danso, and Van de Ven. If they needed to, they'd be here. And as well too, if Painha and Bentancur needed to be here, they'd be here as well too. I think that was a big thing for Thomas Frank and his players today. He made it a lot easier for them to defend. And look, I consistently say this about Spurs. Porro, Danso, Romero, Van de Ven, Spence, Udogie as well too. These are good defenders. They're good players. The weakest defender in this team is probably Porro. But I don't look at any of these guys and think to myself, they're liabilities defensively. So why did Spurs concede so many goals over the last 2 years? Quite simply, I think because it's a structural issue. And I think that's the biggest improvement that will happen to Spurs. Thomas Frank coming in and just adding a bit of structure to this team, making them play closer together and making them harder to beat. Because if so, I'm sorry, Romero, Van de Ven, Spence, Udogie, Danso, these are great defenders, man. Spurs can be a good defensive team next year. They can be a team that concede 10 chances a game into now a team that concede 3 or 4, 2 or 3. So, Thomas Frank, I know it's early days, and I know ultimately as well, too, you didn't get the result you wanted. That will come. And I think as well, too, this is a sign for Daniel Levy as well. Invest in players for this guy. I know they're linked with Savinho right now. They're negotiating for him. And Eze, it does appear that the price tag is throwing both them and Arsenal off. But I think today was really a blueprint and evidence that if you can get Thomas Frank a few more of these players that he wants, this Spurs team can make some real noise this year. I'm not going to say they're going to win the league. Definitely not. I don't think they're at that level. But challenging for the top 4, top 5. I think they're much closer to that level than to the 17th level they showed last year. I think last season, I don't want to call it a fluke, but I think the 5th place finish a year ago was a closer representation to what this team was than the 17th finish this past season. And I think this year you will see that that's the case. So commiserations to Spurs, commiserations to Thomas Frank, and a big shout out to PSG, whose crazy run continues, even though at one point it looked a little shaky. Guys, like, share, subscribe. Let me know what you thought about the tactics board. Click on the link in my description as well too. Show some love to James Alcott. That's a link to get the tactics board for yourself if that's something that interests you. And I'll see you guys very, very soon. Premier League starts this week. And keep an eye out. My prediction video will be out very, very soon. Peace.